Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Corin, for bringing everyone together. And my thanks to you for being interested in the recreation of the earth or the world. Often people use those two things interchangeably. Um, and so I'm going to tell a recreation myth, but I usually start with a poem or a song, in this case, a poem. This is called Spirit of Place, Great Blue Heron. It's a poem by William Stafford. May he rest in peace. I worked with him years ago, and I'd be really curious what kind of poems he'd be writing at this time. But years ago, he wrote this poem about spirit, about place, about animals, about earth. It goes like this. Out of their loneliness for each other, two reeds, or maybe two shadows, lurch forward and become suddenly a life lifted from the dawn and from the rain. It is the wilderness come back again, a lagoon with our city reflected in its eye. We live by faith in such presences. It is a test for us, that thin but real undulating figure that promises, if you keep faith, I will exist at the edge where your vision joins the sunlight and the rain. Heads in the light, feet that go down all the way into the mud where the truth is. That's a great poem. And he's making that pronouncement that poets, storytellers, artists throughout the ages have made, which is at the edge of our vision, we're connecting to the other world, which could be considered the world of nature, but also the unseen world. The world behind the world is what people used to call it. In other words, in the old view of things, what we call the world is the front of the world. And behind the obvious world is the eternal world, the world of creation, the world from which everything that comes to be arises from. And so in that old view, the world is capable of renewal because actually it's renewing all the time. As a matter of fact, when I say the word time, I think about how the origin of timekeeping was sundials. And it turns out that sundials are not effective after sundown. So the original keeping of time only happened during the daylight. And at the end of each day, time would disappear. The darkness would come and people would understand that eternity had come back. And so one of the things that we've lost in the modern world is this vision, this view that connects us at the edge of our knowing with nature and with the world beyond nature, the world behind the world. And another thing we've lost is the connection to timelessness. In other words, people are always running out of time nowadays, but it isn't more time that we need, it's more timelessness that we need in order to feel the depth of creation that is always present and in order to get a new view of the world. So that's one idea, is that it's not simply that we need a better world, we need a better view of the world that already exists. It's natural for humans, it's part of human nature to be stretched between the heavens and the earth below our feet, to be stretched between eternity and everything that is time-bound. That's part of the inner tension of being a human being, because we're supposed to become conscious of things that are beyond our normal grasp. We're supposed to be, in the course of our life, in the growing of the life that's trying to unfold from within each of us, we're supposed to get greater insights and intuitions about the things that are not obvious in the world. And when we lost that kind of sense that humans are stretched between time and eternity, that we are the children of the heaven as well as born from the earth, when that got lost, then along with it went the loss of understanding of the nature of the world. And I'll come back in various ways to talk about the nature of the world seen through the eyes of myth, seen through the kind of creative people throughout the ages. But I wanted to start with this idea that there's always two stories going on. In William Stafford's poem, You have the story of the undulating shadows and the reeds and the herons at the edge of things, and then you see the city reflected in the pond. So those are the two stories, the story of nature and the story of the world itself, the great drama that is both nature and the world in general. And then the second story is always the story trying to unfold from within the soul of each individual human being, the great drama of the world and the drama of the individual soul trying to awaken and blossom in the world. That's the old idea. Those are the two stories. And that idea says that humans are not incidental to the bigger story. They are essential to the bigger story. And that may come up through the story I tell tonight and through other ways. So you could say that something essential to the story of the world is now trying to be rediscovered. And at the same time, something crucial in each life story, each individual life story, is trying to be revealed. We are in creation times again. We are, in a sense, in times of revelation, if we allow ourselves to be. I'm using revelation in its old secular sense, not in its religious sense. The world is always trying to reveal itself. There's an old saying that the world is a mystery trying to be revealed. So yes, we live in a mystery, but it's a mystery that's trying to reveal itself to us. And another old idea that had to do with initiation practices was that each person was trying to reveal themselves to themselves. And then the next idea would be the obstacles and troubles that we encounter in the world are not there intended to stop us. They're there intended to awaken us to things that are deeper and things that are greater than the average view of the world. So that's some background for mythological ideas, imaginative ideas that are more important to find when the world becomes as fragile as it is now. We're living in this really unusual time where nature is rattling and culture is unraveling. And I think everybody sees that in their own way. But it's a very unusual time to be alive. And it's bordering often on chaos. And one of the things that's important in mythology is chaos is the beginning of all creation. So that when things get closer to chaos, they're also closer to recreation. That would be a mythological perspective of the big drama. And so you could say in a way, what we're now looking for is something that has been lost for a long time. That is to say, wholeness. The world is considered, or the cosmos is considered to be a whole, a wholeness. And what's happened now is we're living in the fragmentation of the world. For instance, most modern people think that nature is separate from humans. But really, human nature is connected to nature. And when we lost the view, the world views that saw it as a great whole with us playing a part in it, then we kind of became exiled in the world. And literally, people now think that humans are at odds with creation, at odds with nature, when the old idea is human nature is secretly connected to great nature. And if you look at Native American mythology, for instance, where they had the idea of a second soul, the first soul would be the unique soul of the individual. The second soul was considered to be a part of a person that was innately, from the beginning, connected to some element in nature. For some people, it was a connection to a bird, or a connection to a plant, or a connection to a certain kind of tree. The second soul, an aspect of human nature that was indelibly connected to great nature. So that's another kind of idea that we've lost that leaves us in an exile in the world that we are intended to play a part in. So I'll restate it. Part of what we're looking for is wholeness. Access to wholeness again. The modern world, with this exaggeration of the subject-object division, leaves us in a divided world. And as we see in cultural circumstances, the divisions have become polarizations, and they're getting stronger and deeper. And that will come in the recreation story that I'm on my way to tell. Wholeness is really a way of talking about the interconnection of everything in the world. And one way to look at conditions on a global scale is to see them as symptoms. And so when people look at symptoms, one of the things that we naturally do is what caused those symptoms? How did everything become so divided? But there's another way of looking at symptoms, which is to look at what they're aimed at. So you could say that the intensification of conflicts in the world, the deepening of polarizations in the world, when looked at not for their cause, but what they're aimed at this wholeness that is missing. That the tension, the conflicts, and the polarization are symptoms of what is missing and ways to understand what the next worldview has to be about. That is to say, about interconnectedness and refinding the hidden unities of the world and the hidden unities of the soul. And along the way, wholeness would include connecting the ancient past to the future. From a mythological point of view, we just can't suddenly get a new vision of the world. We actually get a new vision by tapping into the ancient roots of creation. We'll come back to that idea. So it turns out that there are myths not just about creation, but myths about recreation. So right in the middle of the time when everything is falling apart, when most predictions about the future are fatalistic, when science and religion, who usually are opposed to each other, agree on this one subject, that the world might come to an end and it might happen soon. Both, monotheistic religions and positivistic science are thinking that way. And it can feel that way day to day. And yet there's another way to look at it. Certainly a mythological way to look at it is to say that the world renews, that the cosmos renews, that we have been born into a world that renews itself and often does it when things are falling apart. That's the principle behind recreation stories. And so having said that, I might as well tell a recreation story. And so I'm going to tell a version of what's called the Earth Diver story. And it's a kind of story, Earth Diver, that's found universally all around the world. In all kinds of different cultures, there are versions of this idea. So that would suggest that it's kind of an archetypal imagination of the world. And it's the kind of story that would be told exactly when everything seemed to be falling apart. So I'm going to tell a Native American version, or a version of a Native American version, because the old tradition is stories change all the time, and as a matter of fact, the word version means more than one, so there often is no original version. It's a kind of contradiction in terms. So this story begins, like many mythologies, it begins with the endless expansion of water and nothing going on. And then it so happens that a split or a rend or a rent in the sky occurs. Somehow the sky divides, and then out of that rent there falls a woman. A lady from the sky, a woman from the heavens, begins to fall down towards the endless dark expanse of water. And as she's falling from the heavens, two geese that were flying along see her falling, and they fly below her, and they make a nest of their wings, and they catch her in that nest. And now they are bringing her gently down towards the waters that she was falling towards to begin with, but they are holding her in this nest. And as they're dropping and descending with the woman from the sky, the geese call out to see, are there any other living beings? And the answer comes from a great turtle that says, I'm here, bring her down here. And so the geese bring the woman who fell from the sky, and they bring her to rest on the back of the turtle. And some people say that's where the title Turtle Island came from. At any rate, now the woman is on the back of the turtle, and it's the turtle's responsibility to hold her up, but it's really not a great expanse of land or solid place to be on. And so the turtle asks, are there any others here who know anything about any kind of earth or any kind of material that could be brought to expand the base on which the woman who fell from the sky can live and dwell? And when there was no answer from the animals, the woman from the sky herself said, I think if someone were to dive to the bottom of this great ocean, they might find some earth down there. And at that point, many animals appeared, birds and diving animals, and they all began to dive into the depths of the eternal dark waters. And the frog went down, and diving birds went down, and the muskrat went down. All kinds of animals went down looking for this earth that might be at the bottom. And some of them came up exhausted but without any earth, and some of them did not come back at all. And finally, the toad went down. And the toad was down a long time, and when it came back, it too was exhausted. But as it was floating near the turtle saw in the mouth of the toad a small ball of mud, and the turtle reached in and brought it out and gave it to the woman who had fallen from the sky. And she took that mud that had been brought from the very depths of the darkest ocean, and she spread it around the rim of the shell of the turtle. And as she handled it and as she shaped it around the rim, it began to grow. And then she began to spread it out, and that became the earth. That became the place that we now call home. That became the earth on which all the beings that we know live. So I'll stop there. That's the first part of the story. And just to say, I'll stop for a moment and just be quiet and consider what struck you there. If we had to come and find you in that story, where would you be? Where the woman is falling, where the geese capture her or catch her and bring her down, where the diving is going on. Which place would you be in? Because stories invite us into like another world. And if you can just hold on to one little piece that struck you, it, like the mud in the story, can grow inside and create an inner territory to wander on. So I'll just wait for a minute, see what struck you. So I want to say something about creation and recreation myths. Creation myths are not intended simply to explain how things were made and how they came to be. They actually are intended to intone and invoke a sense of the recreation from the origins of life. All creation myths can be handled as recreation myths. The ancient understanding is creation isn't something that happened back there and we are in the aftermath of it. Creation is an ongoing thing that is happening all the time. So these stories that we have from all kinds of ancient cultures were understood to be stories about how the world is creating itself now. And recreation stories in particular. So through these kind of myths, we return to the origins. That's what's happening in this story, where the origins are a woman falling from the sky who says what we need is something at the depth of the ocean, as if through the body of that divine figure, the very highest thing and the very lowest thing are brought together, and that's a symbol of the wholeness that is missing in the world now that has become so fragmented. So ancient peoples participated in these myths. They had rituals that were the rituals of renewal, where they reached a point where they realized that the world couldn't go on, or the culture couldn't go on the way it was. Too many things had become conflicted, too many things had been lost, too many things had been forgotten, and they would go back into the myth and create rituals that came from the myth that would bring everyone back together. And the idea was, when you touch the origins, you touch the potentials of life again. And so when a person was sick, they would put them inside one of these myths. So those were ideas associated with the myth. And then key to the idea, is this notion of life, death, and renewal. that we are part of a mystery, the mystery of the world. The key mystery is the mystery that you see in nature as forests renew themselves from their own collapsing trees. And it's the mystery inside the human soul. That is to say, we are here not just because we were born, we are here to also become reborn and keep being reborn until we are a genuine version of our own self. And so that's the mystery behind the story. It's the mystery behind the earth. It's the mystery in the cosmos according to the old stories. So then this story in particular, this story shows that it begins with this divine feminine figure. And I'm not choosing the story accidentally. It's partly for that figure. It's partly for the notion, the sense, the vision that a feminine divine figure is there at the beginning. And again, I'm using the symptoms in the world to get a sense of what the next world should look like. That is to say, when we live in a world where the feminine is denigrated, where therefore women are demoted or mistreated, and therefore the earth, which everyone knows is Mother Earth, also becomes mistreated, denigrated, and exploited, we know part of what's missing. Part of what's missing is this greater view of the feminine, and many of the ancient myths have the feminine there at the very beginning. And so there's an archetypal goddess, an archetypal feminine that represents the form of the earth. In this case, it's a woman from the sky who also is connected to the deepest things and knows that what's missing is at the bottom and needs to be brought up as if into consciousness. And so one of the ways that people have now begun to think of that is as Gaia, Gaia as Mother Earth, although I want to suggest that there's Mother Earth and there's also Earth as nature, and that those are two different things. In the contemporary world, people use nature and Earth interchangeably, but if you think about it, Earth is about something solid that's usually below us, and nature is about something constantly changing, and they are the two forms, or two of the forms, you could say, of the divine feminine or of the feminine being essence at the beginning of creation. So I also want to say something about the image of the woman falling from the sky, because that's what got me. As soon as I found this story, that's what got me. To me, it's stunningly beautiful. It's like a spiritual beauty. And that's an important thing to know about the world, that beauty is essential to the world. Beauty is not a superficial thing. It's a very deep thing related to the wholeness that's missing. When something is beautiful to our eye, it represents it becomes a representation of wholeness. Beauty and wholeness are connected. And when we lose the sense of wholeness, we begin to lose the beauty. And you can see that in the modern world, the loss of beauty and the intensification of the brutal. So many creation myths and recreation myths begin with a deity of some kind appearing through chaos. In the case of this story, it's the wren in the sky that represents chaos. And then indicating that what's missing is down below. So from the beginning, something in the depths of the world, something in the depths of the psyche needed to be found. And that's another famous thing in creation myths and old stories. There's always something missing right at the beginning. The wholeness is missing at the beginning, as if the world of living and the living world and the world of creation is always about finding the next variation or presentation of wholeness, that wholeness slips from our grasp continuously. So Gaia is the kind of contemporary term and title and figure that has arisen for people to think about, even within science. You have the Gaia hypothesis that comes out of people doing scientific work. But I want to say something about Gaia in myths. So Gaia is usually taken from Greek myth, where Gaia is the earth, it's the earth mother, but phrases that are connected to her, one of them is the first to arise from chaos. In other words, in the telling of the Gaia myth, often it's chaos, and from that chaos comes Gaia. So that if you really want to get it as a mythological image, Gaia represents the burgeoning energy of creation as well as the chaotic precedent to creation. Chaos and creation go together. Creation comes out of chaos. And Gaia has both. She's the first out of creation. And then the other title for Gaia was the one who reveals the entire cosmos. And so now we're back to this enormous feminine figure that represents the cosmos made visible or made evident. What I'm trying to say is when people talk about the missing feminine, what's missing is this great imagination of the feminine as the container, as the wholeness of the cosmos, as, in a sense, the womb of creation. And I'm adding mythological ramifications that go beyond some of the contemporary theories. And then there's an interesting, in myths, there's always a story behind the story. And so in this case, it turns out the origins of Gaia are not in Greece, but they're in ancient India. That the term, title, Gaia goes back to the Vedas, the ancient Vedas in India, where the term was Gayatri, which many people now know because of the Gayatri mantra, which appears in the ancient Rig Veda. And it's considered to be, this chant, this mantra, is considered to be the first chant to come out of the basest sound of the cosmos, which is Om. Om is the humming of the cosmos, and the first chant or mantra to come out is the Gayatri mantra, and that's related to Gaia. And so, to me, that's interesting, that there's a connection between the Greek mythology and the ancient myths in India, as if to say, once again, the feminine figure becomes the whole thing in its variations, that they're secretly connected as a whole. So the range and scope of Gaia went far beyond what most people now refer to as the earth. She brought forth, according to the old myths, the entire universe, and she persists as the living substance and sacred source of life ongoing. So it's a very big thing, the imagination of which has mostly been lost, and along with that loss, the sense of wholeness, and along with the sense of wholeness, the felt feeling that we are part of it, that we have a part in that whole thing. And humans in particular, there's two things that used to be known about humanity. The part of humans is partly consciousness, knowing, awakenedness, and then also gratitude for the gift of life. That comes up in old myths. Those two things are that humans are supposed to be bringing to the world: consciousness of what's happening, of the beauty, of the ongoing creation, and gratitude for the gift of life, even if we live in the hard times. So Gaia then becomes the cosmic mother, the source of life, the source of creation coming out of chaos, but also remains the common ground below our feet. In other words, it's a penetrating sense of this creative energy that some people call the goddess. But also, of course, then this energy would be there in every garden, but strangely enough, it's there in every cemetery also, because this great feminine energy is the womb and the tomb. And Gaia is the source of all of life, but also the presence of death. And we'll get around to that when we get to another part of the story. So I want to hit some of the key themes in that first section of the story. And one would be, notice how the earth divers, the various kinds of animals, are all cooperating. Something needs to be done. Something people think, beings have to descend, go into darkness, go into unknown territories in order to find what's missing, and they cooperate, they work together. None of the diving birds or the animals that go down have superpowers. They're not heroic. Many of them fail in the mission. Some of them don't even come back. And even the one who succeeds is almost exhausted and dead. And so there's this suggestion of the interweaving and the cooperation between the various beings that happen at the very beginning of creation, which is a suggestion again that that's something we need to go back to. Those ideas are now appearing more commonly in the world, the idea that we have to figure out ways to cooperate, and along with that, the sense that what we call the world is an interwoven web of all beings being part of the same thing. That's part of the vision, I think, that is trying to arise so that we can imagine the next world radically different than the one that we have been living in. Just to put a point on it, the idea of heroic energies and people and beings saving the world doesn't work out. Heroics is part of the reason we're in the trouble we are in, I would say. And so what's a different way to go from heroics, cooperation, recognizing the interwoven aspects of things, becomes another way to look at the world. And to be honest, it's kind of a feminine vision. Weaving is something that usually comes out of the feminine energy. And so there's a burgeoning or potential imagination about the reweaving of the world, and that we could consciously become part of that. And the old stories are saying that. All right, so in the dark times, you could say that we each become potential earth divers ourselves. That's part of the idea of the story, is to identify with the elements in the story and then realize that if we would descend into our own psyches, we could find something to bring from our own unconscious depths that is needed in the conscious world. And so that's a way to imagine us participating in this Earth Diver project. So in that sense, we each have something to offer that when it is brought up into consciousness is like the ball of mud that was in the toad's mouth. And when it's handled properly, it can spread and grow. So we may be each just a small speck in the great universe, but we each have access to the unconscious, which, as people used to say, is greater than anything that's conscious, much greater. Therefore, when things get forgotten or misplaced, they don't disappear, they fall back into the unconscious, in mythology known as the eternal endless ocean. And down at the bottom of that ocean of unconsciousness are elements of earth that need to be brought up into consciousness. And so the stories, if you imagine ancient people entered the story, they felt they were in that story. We become potential earth divers. Each of us just a small being in this great expanse of the universe or the cosmos, but each of us able to bring something that is necessary to bring it up into creation so that the world can continue. I'm talking about a radical view of how the world and the earth gets recreated, the participation in humans by individually bringing up elements of consciousness. And when you see it that way, everyone doesn't have to agree on a plan. Everybody just has to agree to become more conscious and bring things into the world that are needed. So you could say that there's a process of emergence that's trying to happen the way it happens in the story. That from those of us alive at this time, things are trying to emerge through us. So this is another old idea that the eternal is always trying to enter this world, and it can only enter through the people who are alive at a given time. And so if you take that idea and put it together with this story, that we are each in a position to become vehicles through which the energies of creation, the timeless energies of the eternal, can enter and renew the world. And our job in that process would be to become more conscious of what is hidden in our own souls, to become more able to descend into darkness in order to find what used to be called the light inside the dark, the soulful things that can be added to creation. And since the world seems to be falling apart, and since we go through experiences like pandemics where we have to separate and kind of descend anyway, then why not find these old ideas from ancient myths about how descent leads to renewal? So that's the first part of the story and the first sense of what recreation might be like, might look like from a mythic point of view. And so I see some reflections from the story and some questions. So I'll pick them up. I was struck by how all the beings were willing to help and even sacrifice their lives for this other being who fell from the sky and whom they did not know. And so, yes, in a way they didn't know her, but in a way they did. Just the way there's a way in which we don't know that much about the feminine in its great cosmic form anymore, and yet we also do. Because the womb of the cosmos is recreated and the womb of nature is recreated in the womb of every mother, and so on. We can get more quickly back in touch with those things. But yeah, I'm struck by that too. To me, the beauty of the story is just one thing after another, especially the descent from the sky and then the descent from the back of the turtle to the very depths of the ocean, which the ocean is often a symbol for the unconscious for humans. So thank you for that. I'm struck by the mud that grows into the earth, the magic of that. Can you unwrap that a little bit? So the way it resonates for me is this idea that we bring something up, it seems like a little thing, from our own unconscious or the unconscious that is connected to us. And when it becomes conscious, it can grow into a bigger thing. I mean, isn't that what happens when someone gets an image that becomes a painting, when someone gets a kind of line that becomes a song? That we're all here to participate in creation, which is this ongoing thing. And it often starts with something small. I read William Stafford at the beginning, and he was famous for writing a poem every day. And he would wake up and the first word that came to him would be the word of the poem of that day, of that morning. And he would write a poem from that word. And so that was the little bit of mud that came up because he fell asleep and he dreamt, and then a word came up and that became a poem. And when that poem entered the world, it continued creation. Creation means something enters the world that wasn't there. So we're all here to be partially earth divers and participate in creation. And that's a different idea than we're all here to agree on some political principle or something. It's actually more immediate, and it's also more natural. And so I'll just repeat another thing. When we're in times of great change and great challenge, a small change can have a big result. So that's another thing about that little bit of mud. What we bring in that seems like a small change, when the world is on the verge, and it's either on the verge of collapse and or the verge of recreation, then a small thing can become a big thing, the way that ball of mud grew greater. And notice that it grew greater when the woman who fell from the sky, who's representing the substance of creation, when she handles it. And so we can take that to ourselves also and say, things are trying to enter our life and our consciousness all the time, through dreams, through inspirations, through visions, through pain. And if we allow those things to be present, if we engage them as they are, they will grow. They'll grow. Stories are like that. All of the arts are like that. And most human expression is like that. I'm struck by the idea that it was a woman, not a man, and that she and the other helpers kept asking for help, engaging each other, creating opportunities for others to seek and share their genius. Thank you. That's another version or take on the cooperation. that right from the beginning there's an asking for help. And so then when we find ourselves unable to ask for help, we're as if trapped and outside of the real dynamic of what life is about. And I would suggest now the help we need has to come from somewhere else. Um, you know, you work with the story a little bit, like take the piece of mud and just hold it and carry it around, and then you fall asleep and you have a dream and something happens because you took that bit of mud from that story, and that story was connected to creation, and so is your soul, and so is your mind. And just by letting things come in, or by saying, I need help, things can change. So thank you for that again. Here's a question. Could you please give some examples of the metaphorical mud that could be brought up from the depths for these times? Well, let's see. Well, I mean, I've been given some. All creative modes are like bringing things from the unconscious into conscious awareness, from the darkness into the light, from the depths of the unconscious into a greater awareness. And so, what I get out of that, that metaphorical mud, is that, well, first of all, it's mud, it's earth. So, the world is made of the five elements typically, fire, water, earth in the middle. And then in some cultures, nature, which doesn't mean earth, nature means change, and then mineral. And so when we're bringing the mud, we're actually engaging in creation, that we can become part of this thing that is happening anyway that most people don't understand now, that we're on the verge of creation all the time. We're on the verge of creating relationships. We're on the verge of creating conversations. And we can be on the verge of bringing things into existence that weren't there before. And that can be following a thought, following a dream, following imagination. And we have to learn to trust our own connection to those things. I mean, I'm standing here talking, and I can see certain things that are written on the screens, but mostly the words are just coming, and I couldn't even tell you from where. And I learned somewhere in the course of my life to trust that things are trying to be said, and they're coming through me sometimes. I hope I'm making sense, because anybody, when they're talking honestly, is really, as people will say, speaking from their heart, but it's really from the heart within the heart, which is this deep place that things arise from, just the way the mud arose from the depth of those original dark waters. We're tied into this process, and much of our education really takes us away from the natural way that we each are able to be creative. And the times have gotten so severe, and the trouble has gotten so universal and global, that we're each needed, like the animals who went diving, to bring something back from the unknown, from the unseen, and add it to the world. And that's how the world gets remade. And that's how we become conscious of who we really are. I'm operating from the idea that every soul born comes into the world not empty and aimless, but comes in with some genius, some combination of gifts and talents and abilities, and with an aim in life, a destination or a destiny. And when we live that way, yes, we'll make mistakes, we may be stumbling, but when we live that way, we are adding to creation. And imagine if more people were doing that instead of arguing about who's right or wrong, usually about some historical thing. If that were to change, then we might find ourselves walking on a different ground and relating to many more aspects of the world that previously have been declared not alive or simply objective. As you put it, stories often transport us to another world, and yet they can also reground us, reconnect us to the world we live in. Thank you. I agree. Do you recommend any practices to connect us to the places where we live, even if these places have so often been wounded by historical and personal traumas, environmental pollution, neglect? Thank you. Really good and important thing. It was in the poem in the beginning, Spirit of Place, is what Stafford called the poem. And then the woman descending from the rent and split in the sky is really the sacred coming to earth. And so one of the purposes or natural effects of these creation myths is a reminder that this is sacred. We're living in the sacred world. We're standing on the sacred ground. If you imagine it as the woman who fell from the sky, from the heavens, then you know that it's a sacred place. And so every place we are, they used to call it the genius loci. Every place has its genius. Genius means the spirit that's already there. The spirit that's already there in a person and the spirit that's already there in the place. And when you get that, you realize places can talk to us. And most people can name the places where they felt the most grounded, the most connected, the most inspired. I could list them, and I see them in the back of my mind as I'm speaking. And so once we get a sense of the spirit of place, it's just a small step to get inspired to how to help that place be a sacred place, be a whole place, be a healthy place. And if you imagine, the idea isn't to have an agreement on how it happens, it's just many people awakening to the genius of the local place where they are, and that makes all the places generative and regenerative, and somehow that adds up to the return of the sacred world. And I want to restate this idea. So many cultural stories and many religions, monotheistic religions especially, it's usually a male god that creates the world and then departs. I mean, that's one of the stories that has penetrated the world for thousands of years. The Latin was Deus absconditus. God makes the place and he absconds. And then the earth becomes a fallen world, a world that is distant from the sacred, fallen from the heavens. But here in this story, which is more characteristic of many stories found around the world, the woman from the heavens remains on the earth. That was an old idea. That the idea isn't to, as some religious interpretations would have it be, that we live in a fallen world and we have to follow certain rules, and if we do that, then at the end we can go to heaven. We can get back to the sacred. That's a distorted idea. The other idea was heaven is here on earth, and our job is to keep finding heaven on earth. And that's more like the descent happening in this story. The divine descends and stays in the earth, and there are many stories of that. And that tells you that each place is sacred and sacred in its own way. And then from there, we get on the adventure of the rediscovery of the sacred that was under our feet. Oh my God, it wasn't just under our feet, it was in our own souls. All right, I'll go to the second part of the story. Thank you for questions and comments. So just to say, the next worldview, I'm in a place where I'm suggesting that we are experiencing the collapse of a worldview. You can see it in politics as the collapse of the liberal worldview, liberal small L worldview. We see it as the collapse of the Enlightenment worldview. We're at the end of an era, and each era is shaped by a worldview, and we're at the end of a worldview. That's another way to understand the falling apart. It's happened before. And that puts us in this in-between place where we could become vehicles through which the next worldview enters our lives, our collective life. And I want to suggest that the next worldview, I've already suggested it should be more cooperative. I've suggested that following stories, it requires or needs a renewed imagination of the feminine as that which contains everything, which gives you a sense of the sacred and the size of things, and that brings back Mother Earth as sacred and Mother Nature as the essence of creation. And then I want to suggest that the next worldview has to have a deeper understanding of darkness, opposition, and conflict. And so following these old myths, the idea is that conflict won't disappear. Oppositions will not melt away. It's how they are seen and how we understand them that matters. And that's what comes up in the next part of this story. So where we stopped the story was that the woman who fell from the sky, with the assistance and cooperation of birds and animals, had gotten some of the mud of creation from the very depths of existence, and that had been magically able to spread with her touch and the certain ways of handling earth until the earth had formed. And now creation was ready to continue. That much had happened. And then it happened that the woman who fell from the sky was pregnant, and was pregnant with twins. And some people say that's why she fell out of the heavens. I don't really know. But what happened is the twins were getting ready to be born. And even before they were born, people, those who were the animals, I guess, who were present, could hear struggling going on inside the womb, because there was a tension between those twins. And when it came time to be born, one of the twins was willing and ready to be born in the natural way, coming down the birth canal, and the other one refused to be born that way. And the one who refused to be born in that natural way managed to be born by kicking his way out the side of the woman who had fallen from the sky, who was broken into pieces in giving birth to that son, who was called the hard one, whereas the other one, who had been born in a normal way, was called the gentle one. And some people call them bad mind and good mind and say they exist inside everyone. I don't know, but at that point, the woman who had fallen from the sky, who had spread the earth, also became part of the earth. They say that eventually what happened is the parts of her got buried in the earth, and that from the parts of her came all of the grains and all of the beans and all of the plants and all of the flowers, that she became the growing, ongoing creation of the earth from our own body, which had come from the heavens. I don't know, but in the story it says what happened next was those two twin brothers opposite each other began to grow very quickly, and it turned out that they were part of the next phase of creation, because as they grew, they became the ones who were making things. And it turned out that whatever the gentle brother did, the other hard brother would do the opposite. And so the gentle brother was making delightful creatures, creatures that were beautiful, creatures that were gentle. And then the hard brother was making the serpents with poison and making animals that had horns and claws. And one was making gentle creatures and creating a gentle feeling in the world. And the other was creating poisonous and dangerous and hard animals and continuing the creation of the hard side of the world. And that's the way things were going. And since they couldn't see eye to eye, they went in different directions. And until one day, the gentle brother created a partridge, a beautiful, gentle bird that came into existence. And as soon as it got into the world, it flew in the direction of the hard brother. And the gentle brother said to the partridge, "Where are you going?" And the partridge said, "I'm going to that part of the world because that's the only place where fresh water is." And so the gentle brother decided to follow the partridge into the hard world of the other brother, and he walked amongst those serpent and horned animals and all that. And then they came upon a giant toad that had drank up all the waters of the earth, the rivers and the streams and the lakes and the oceans, until that huge toad was hoarding all the water of life. And the gentle brother instinctively understood that what he had to do was penetrate that toad in order to release the waters of life. And that's what he did. The gentle brother found a way to penetrate that toad and break him apart. And out came pouring all the waters, the fresh waters and the salt waters, all the waters of the earth, and the waters of life began to flow again. But at that point, the hard brother became even more hardened in his attitude towards the gentle brother. And one night, the woman who had fallen from the sky, the mother of those two oppositional brothers, came to the gentle brother and said, "Beware, because your hard brother would be trying to kill you." And sure enough, that's what happened. The hard brother came looking for the gentle brother, and when they came together, they realized they would never see eye to eye. And so they agreed upon a formal combat, and those two brothers, who of course were not human beings, they were part of the creation process, they began to fight with each other. And sure enough, the hard brother was stronger, was more determined, and he began to pound the gentle brother into the earth. And the gentle brother began to lose his energy for life and began to be pounded into the earth, which of course was his mother in some sense. And as he was being pressed down into the earth, the spirit of the mother came to the gentle brother and inspired him and spoke to him and encouraged him, and the gentle brother managed to get back up in the fight, and he finally defeated and killed the hard brother. And then one night, in a dream, the hard brother came to the gentle brother and said, I've left that earth now, and I've gone out in the west. I'm in an island out there. And listen, when people come along, because they're coming next, when people come along, they will also die one day. And when they die, they'll come to the place where I am. And at that point, the gentle brother realized that the hard brother had found his place. And the gentle brother went on with creation. And it was shortly after that that the people came along. And according to the ancient people, we are the inheritors of this earth. We are the inheritors of this tension between the gentle and the hard, between the good and the bad. And we are the inheritors of this ongoing creation and the beauty and the wholeness and the wonder that came into the world when that woman, that lady, fell from the heavens and the earth began to gather below her. We are the inheritors of that dynamic process of creation, which is trying to renew itself even as we are living and trying to awaken in our own souls. So that's the second part of the story, and I'll wait for a minute and find your place in that territory or one of those territories. All right, so we have the first part of the story, which is about descent and beauty and creation and earthiness. And then the second part of the story really begins with this tension of the opposites. So coincidentia oppositorum is the Latin term, that in order for things to continue on earth, things have to divide. And so that's the two brothers there is a reference to the original split. Remember I was saying that the woman and the beauty and the cooperation represents a wholeness that we don't have anymore, that we long for secretly, although many people don't even know it's possible. And so there is that wholeness, and there is that hidden unity in the world. And then there's this other thing, which is the division of things, which involves polarization and opposition. And the suggestion of ancient myths, and especially creation myths, is that we cannot get rid of that is part of the world. And it's seen in this extreme version with the brothers fighting, but it's also part of the world. And I want to go back to Gaia. So Gaia, who was called in ancient Greece the mother of all, excludes nothing from the totality of creation. That was an old phrase. Gaia as mother of all includes everything, light and shadow, good and bad. And so Gaia in the myths unites with Uranos, the sky god. Earth, Gaia is a reference to Earth. Earth unites with the sky god, and their union brings forth violence and brutality, opposition and force that are part of the great drama of life. I'm just repeating another old myth here. So as the mother of all, Gaia is also the mother of opposites. And it was said in ancient times that without opposition, creation can't continue. That's even true inside of a person. In other words, we grow when we face up to an opposition or a conflict or a tension in our own lives. That's how we grow. The whole idea of psychology, depth psychology, is the conscious and the unconscious. The brightness of consciousness and everything else is in the unconscious. And so we're in this tension, even the whole idea of day and night, the bright day and the dark night, the dawn and then the falling of darkness. at the end of every day. The darkness, the light, the good, the bad, the oppositional things are part of the origin of creation. And the old idea was, without oppositions, we won't have creation. So that's why I was saying, I think the view of the next world is not a world without opposition. It's a world where we understand it in deeper, more meaningful ways. Going back to Gaia, so Gaia also gave birth eventually to Aphrodite. And Aphrodite was born from the sea foam, which was a combination of the energy of the sky and the energy of the ocean. And so Aphrodite represented the Uranus, the sky god, and Gaia, the earth god, come together. And then Aphrodite, had they said, besides being a goddess of beauty and love, Aphrodite had the memory of the whole. And so Aphrodite is the goddess of love, and she represents that part of ourselves that loves moments of wholeness, that is seeking to find in the other something that brings wholeness to ourselves. So I'm describing Gaia as the source of creation, as the representation of wholeness on a cosmic level, as well as a level of the earth, as well as the level of the soul of the individual, but also Gaia as the mother of the tension of opposites, from which is generated love. That I'm trying to say that if we can't take the whole thing in, then we're kidding when we say earth, or we're not being accurate if we're just talking about part of the world. That we are born into this world that is secretly a unity, but also manifests as a polarity or a tension of opposites. So one more old saying, no healing can occur unless the original split is touched. So that was the idea. When we deal with the split in ourselves or a split in our community, we're really being invited to touch the original split. Just the way the beginning of the story, we are invited to descend and find the earth hidden below the dark waters. We're also invited to touch the original split. And when you go back into a creation story, you touch the original split, in this case, the good and the bad brother. And then from there comes the unity that comes from the division. Mythological images, they might be challenging. I'm not sure we'll hear from comments and questions. So I think I mentioned in the story that the two twins were sometimes referred to as good mind and bad mind. Makes me think of Rumi. He had a poem where he says, everyone born is like that brown and white ox. Everyone has a dark part and a white part. And if you don't know that, you haven't fully been born yet. So being born, which means being born into consciousness, means becoming aware of the dark and the light sides of ourselves. Now, you could imagine that when people are not dealing with the oppositions within, they have to be played out in the world as fate. So from the old understanding, especially from the mythic sense of things, the conflicts and oppositions and polarizations in the world are an outward manifestation of something we're actually also experiencing within. And then when you turn that around, you say, if we can deal with some of our own conflicts, we then diminish the conflicts in the world. I mean, some of these autocrats that are now, fermenting so much conflict, one of the problems is people are following them. If people understood that the real conflict is inside ourselves, the word jihad doesn't mean go out and kill people that don't agree with you. The word jihad is a reference to the battle between the dark and the light in each person's heart. And so the story is trying to suggest that too, because those two brothers, the hard and the gentle, they were there when they finished what they were doing. Then the world was ready for people. That's what the story said. So I want to say something about the hard brother, because that's the hard one to understand. And so he's the sharp-edged, cold-hearted extremes of the human psyche. He's the unforgiving brother who can embrace violence and be very greedy. He also represents fixated ideas and hardline beliefs, which now have become so prominent. And he can be obsessive and compulsive. So he creates the toad who obsessively takes all the water of life. And so you can see that when the hard brother, the dark parts of life are not understood, they can gather all the energy. It's almost what's happening politically in many parts of the world, is that the energy is gathering into the extremes, especially the kind of extremes of autocracy and the extremes of misogyny and the extremes of racism and so on, that's kind of happening now. And so that's one way to understand the hard brother. And it's really interesting that the gentle brother, who you wouldn't think would act that way, actually has to defeat that hard brother, has to take him on, has to be engaged in that struggle. And the gentle one had to puncture the toad in order to release the waters of life. And that gives some sense of, like Rumi's idea, we can't just claim to be on the good side. If we're just on the good side, then we're secretly putting everyone else on the dark side. And so we have to somehow learn how to inhabit both aspects, just the way Gaia produces both aspects. So compulsiveness and obsessiveness are part of the hard brother. Greed, of course, is part manifest by the toad. Interesting to me that in the story, it's a toad that goes down and gets the mud that begins the creation of the earth, and then it's a toad who absorbs all the water after getting the earth from the water. So there's a kind of, a play on a hidden unity. There's another recreation story, one of the most famous stories in the world, the churning of the milk ocean, an ancient story from India. And in that story, the good and the bad don't fight it out. Actually, Vishnu, the god of dreaming up the world, gets them to have a tug of war. So they have not a battle against each other, but they secretly work together and churn the ocean in order to bring the healing elixir back. And so if the idea of the two fighting is too much, there's the idea of somehow getting the two sides that are polarized to work together in order to bring back something that they both want, which in the story of the Milk Ocean is the healing elixir of the world that has been lost at the bottom of the ocean. These are big images that are trying to give a sense of what the big energies are and how we might better understand them. Let's see. I'm getting lost in the waters of the ocean myself. Well, I guess we're just left with this struggle between the dark and light and the hard and the gentle. And the more conscious we can become of it and become of those forces in ourselves, the more creative tension we can embody and handle. In other words, right now you get people just wanting one side or the other. Just, this is all I want. And that is not creation. You can't add to the recreation of the world by taking one side. It's also immature. So there's an old idea that says maturity is involves a capacity for a greater and greater ability to handle opposing things. Like sometimes a person has to have two ideas and be able to hold on to them both. And that immaturity is having to have an answer that resolves the tension right now. And so we're in this world that is so intensified with polarizations and oppositions. The suggestion is this is the time to learn how to hold those things, because the tension of opposites is what creates the next unseen thing. And I'm not saying that people in general culture are going to figure that out all of a sudden. I'm talking about those of us who are interested in these kind of ideas of healing, of wholeness, of recreation, of renewal, that this is the kind of thing we have to learn. And just to say, the world or the collective humanity doesn't change because everyone suddenly wakes up or everyone suddenly agrees. It changes because a certain proportion of people begin to feel the world in a different way, begin to heal themselves in a different way, and begin to see the world through new eyes. And that slowly begins to change the collective. And so I'm suggesting in this part of the story that the hope for having a next world that isn't as polarized and so committed to opposition and conflict has something to do with how we handle our own conflicts and how we become more conscious of the oppositional energies that penetrate the world, like day and night, like left and right, like up and down. So one more time, in order to help creation continue, the gentle brother has to, in a sense, take a walk on the wild side and enter the dark side of life in order to find the water of life that is captured over there, and in order to release some of the energy of creation to continue. So that's a challenging idea, that that we can't simply say we're on the good side and leave the rest to everybody else. So these kind of stories say that the opposites were there from the very beginning, and they become more intensely critical at every change in life, at every critical change. And we're in the critical time now. We're in the crucial time when things are trying to change, when chaos could become creation, and how we handle those opposing energies and how we understand it and how much consciousness we can bring to it has an effect on whether it goes further into chaos or moves towards creation and renewal. So just one more element of this, that it isn't simply up to us. In other words, there are energies in the world, just the way the story begins with the woman who falls from the sky. She's an archetypal figure. That's the modern way of saying it. Arche means very ancient, is really what it means. Archetypal, and typal means, so it means ancient and original form, ancient original type. And so she's an archetype. The whole process in the story is the archetype of creation. So those are two of the archetypes that are at play, or can be at play right now. And the idea is the archetypes help us respond to the conditions of the world, so that when the world is polarized and fragmented and falling apart, different archetypes get activated, and we have access to those archetypes. And so I'm suggesting one of them is the archetype of the Great Mother, of the Mother Nature, but also Mother Earth and Mother Nature, the archetype of wholeness, the archetype of beauty and wholeness connected. I'm suggesting that that is more activated now, and that we can draw on that energy. Like the person who asked the question of how do we help the local place become sacred and become inspirited? That process would be bringing the archetype of wholeness and beauty further into the world. And it can be done in a pretty conscious way. And then the other archetype that's activated is the archetype of the creator or creation. And this is a very creative time. In a sense, you could say, the institutions are going hollow and things are falling apart. But while things are falling apart, the messages that are the callings in people's lives are accelerated. The callings can get through because anyone who's aware of how it's falling apart is in some sense aware of something else might be coming in to take its place. And if the institutions seem kind of hollow and everything's in flux, the callings that are trying to get to each person's heart and soul can get through more readily if we are open to those. And so to me, that's part of the archetype of creation, the awakening to the fact that each one of us is aimed at something meaningful, and we are each called to add something to the world, and that is called creation. Anything that enters the world or appears in the world that wasn't there before is an aspect of creation continuing. So archetypes are deep energies that contain life potentials that we have access to because our psyches are connected to the unconscious, where the archetypes are. And at different times, different archetypes are activated. And I would name a few right now. One is, we're talking about the divine feminine in its representation as beauty, as the nourishing quality of the earth, the welcoming quality of the earth, and as the wholeness represented as the cosmos as well as the earth. The archetype of creation, which takes the tensions of life and holds them long enough that a third thing comes out of that continues creation. And then the other archetype I would say that's activated now is the archetype of initiation, which is the dynamic that causes transformation. And so on a collective level, we're in a collective rite of passage, you could say. And we don't have to think it all up ourselves. Energies, ideas can come from the presence of the archetypes, just as in the story, the animals are connected to the woman who fell from the sky, and part of what's going on, we are connected to it also, and we have access to the archetypes that can give us inspiration and also activate potentials in ourselves and give us the energy to take on the exact problems that are tearing the world apart. Reflections. I landed where the partridge chose to go, to the hard brother's land where the only fresh water was, and the gentle brother followed and experienced the hard world. Yeah, it's interesting. Corin had mentioned at the beginning that we work at Mosaic, which is a kind of art project or healing art project, which changes all the time. But the focus has always been go to the hard places. Go to the places where people are suffering. And I'll tell you what happens and I'm talking about prisons, I'm talking about the barrio, the hood, the places where people are exiled, working with refugees. If you're looking for hope, and if you're looking for inspiration, believe it or not, that's the places where you're likely to find it. In the suburbs and in the middle class situations, it's harder to find hope often. And so it's when we're in the troubled places, when we're in the hard land, when the territory of the hard brother is usually when the energies of imagination get awakened and a greater capacity to hope comes from struggling with the hard things. So thank you for that. I'm struck by the fact that the woman is a diver from the sky as opposed to just falling. That implies she might have chosen to dive, not knowing how it would turn out. She follows her imagination even though she might die. Then the grace of the geese supporting her brings in the cooperation of the creatures in the continuation of creation. I think that's a fine way to enter the story and to imagine that it's all about diving. When we're born, we're falling out of the womb. Gravity is also part of the birth canal, and we're supposed to keep falling. It's called incarnation. We're supposed to keep incarnating. We're supposed to get deeper and deeper into life. And when things fall apart, it's as if we're all falling together, collective rite of passage. We've been in a descent for almost 3 years with COVID, but we've also been in a descent for many more years than that as we see the intensification of polarizations and oppositions. We've been in this falling state for quite a while. And so the old idea is when you find yourself falling, you might as well dive. I identify more with the hard brother. I've been the black sheep, the truth speaker that points out the elephant in the room, the reaper, willing to rock the boat even though it jeopardizes my acceptance by those who are more complacent. Thank you. Yeah, some of us know that place of the black sheep. And of course, the trick is not to over-identify, right? If someone, it's interesting how most families have a black sheep. As if to say people are trying to locate the hard brother in one so the others don't have to deal with it. That's also the root of racism, by the way. But anyway, the idea is not to get stuck as just being the black sheep. I'm not saying that's your case, but I'm saying it is a danger. So, in other words, if the child in the family is going to be blamed for things, going to be designated as the black sheep, then you only have two choices. You can wither away or you can take on the role. But then those things that preserve us or give us a sense of place early on can be the same things that keep us from growing later. So our job, in a sense, is to be both understand how we could be the dark brother or sister, and understand how we could be the gentle, caring brother or sister as well. And as each of us carries more of the weight of our own psyches, then less of it is projected into the world, and therefore it is not lived outside as fate. It is lived inside as consciousness. This sounds like an invitation to embrace the yes and holding these seemingly opposite forces in tension, the womb and the tomb, gentleness and toughness. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. It wasn't me. It comes from the creation myths. Question, do we need our hard brother to help realize our gifts to the world? Good question. Sometimes, yes. You know, I mean, the things that are hard to do require some hard brother or hard sister energy. You know, sometimes, a person can have a gift. I operate from the idea that everyone is gifted. Everybody's born with their genius, some genius. Genius means the spirit that's already there. It also is a reference to the aggregation of gifts and talents. And everyone has some gifts to give. We start out with the gift of life. We are given the gift of life, and we come into life with gifts to give. And yet, to give one's gift can be a hard thing. As a matter of fact, we come up against fears. We come up against early life rejections, If a child is rejected when they try to show their inner gold, it becomes very difficult to show it later. And sometimes we need a hard brother or a hard sister to just say, I'm taking that step now. And some projects require some hard brother, hard sister energy towards the end to get it to completion. Notice that the hard brother and the gentle brother are both operating strongly, setting the world up for the humans who come. And so every time we want to take a next step in life, we might need some hard brother and hard sister. And there are ways to recognize a certain capacity for strength or decisiveness or courage in ourselves that we don't have to call on all the time. There's times we have to call on it. And if you study depth psychology, you find Carl Jung there saying, eventually we have to go face to face with our own shadow, just the way the gentle brother goes into the dark territory of the hard brother. So these are things that are part of the psychological life and part of the creative life. Can you speak to the needed reverence for the non-human world, decentralizing the human as part of recreation? Where and how does this live in creation and recreation myths? I heard it with the story you told, and there is still a sense that the non-human world came together for the survival and the life of the human at the cost of their lives. Our modern consciousness is centered around the earth and non-human world being here for us, not autonomous and sentient in its own right, not here to solely serve us. Thank you. No, that's a good thing to bring up, and I don't know how it comes across when I was telling it, but let's see. There's two big mistakes. One would be to think that it's all about the human being and that we are not only the center of things, but the dominant energy of things. And the other mistake would be to think that we're not essential to it. Those are the two mistakes. There's a way in which humans have to understand the center in order to be helpful. So, in order to be properly connected to other sentient beings, we have to be in our own human nature. So it's a hard thing for me to sort out. I worry, though, these days about misunderstanding. When a person feels connected to their deep sense of self and soul, there's an automatic greater awareness of the presence, the living presence of trees, the living presence of animals, and on from there. So I think as long as it's ego-driven, it's going to be attempting to override But in the depths of human nature, there's a kind of equalizing connection to the elements of nature, I guess. I don't have a good way of talking about it right now, but I understand where the question is coming from. I guess I want to repeat this, though, that we have a important role to play, even though we are a small speck in a great cosmos. And even though we have made many, many mistakes, humans have destroyed parts of the world and brought the world into greater and greater danger and risk. There's a lot of agreement around that. However, if we have the power to bring that kind of damage, there's an implication that we would have the power to bring a form of healing too. That you can't, again, the two brothers, you can't have one without the other. And so I'll go back to the idea that human nature is secretly connected to great nature, and the idea of the second soul held by so many native tribes in North America and other places, that there's a part of our soul that is directly connected to elements of nature. And when we're conscious of that part, we become more conscious and instinctively aware that everything else is living and everything needs to be respected. And then again, though, when we say respect other living forms, you can't respect other forms without first respecting one's own nature. There's a strange dynamic there. And I think there are points of awakening where the both things happen at once. You stand next to a tree, you can feel quite humble. I mean, the tree, a tall tree, it knows its own roots. It's not standing there having existential questions. Am I a tree or not a tree? It's not doing that. You stand next to it, you can feel the essence, the living essence of the tree, but you can feel it better when you feel your own living essence. Maybe that's what I'm saying. Thank you for that question. Whose culture is the hard, gentle brother story from? Well, I'd mentioned at the beginning, it's a story that's told by a number of Native American tribes throughout the Americas. It's also, Earth Diver stories are told all over the world. So there's many, many versions of them, of the story around the world, and there's many versions in, for instance, North America. And so sometimes it's two geese that are flying, and sometimes it's two loons, depending on the spirit of place. And so when I'm saying something like good mind, bad mind, that's from an Iroquois version of the story, but there's many other versions. I wasn't telling any specific version. I was more trying to get at the essence of the story, or the essences of the story. I've noticed more and more a sense of timelessness since COVID. Could it be a time of initiation? Kairos time, perhaps. Yes, I completely agree. It's initiatory time. One of the few things that has made some people go, oh, I think we're all connected, has been a pandemic. When you realize we're all breathing the same breath, and that we can be infecting or inspiring each other. And so when these things don't come in a positive way, they come in a tragic way. And you could say that the kind of procession of tragedies that have become common in modern life, if you look not at the cause simply, but at the aim, are trying to awaken us to the interconnectedness of everything that happens on a creature level, but even on the level of molecules and germs and all kinds of things. There's an old idea that says that when we breathe, we're breathing in the whole world. Now there's a notion of interconnection. And the whole world runs through us as we breathe, because the breath we breathe is air that has been in the whole world. And that we are that close to the living essence of the world as nature, as creation. And so when we don't get it in a positive way, and imagine ancient people having these stories where it's being delivered to everyone from childhood through all stages of life, understanding that we live in these stories, that they might get it and probably have gotten it in a much more positive way in the modern world. The message is so important. If it doesn't come through a positive, it's going to come through the negative. And so pandemic shows that we actually are all connected, literally. And the breath of creation is the breath of inspiration, but it's also the ongoing breathing of the world. And the increase of interest in breathing practices and all are really connected to nature. It's human nature getting reconnected to great nature. We are all breathing together. We are all sleeping. We are all dreaming. We are all attempting to find peace or find love or find beauty together. And hopefully that'll become more apparent to more people. But in the meantime, those of us that can feel it in some small or greater way, that's our job, to keep feeling it, to keep finding it. And so we're coming to a conclusion. I'm a big fan of timelessness, but on Zoom things have time limits. Again, I want to thank everybody for being interested in this, and whatever struck you in the story or in the conversation, let it be like a bit of mud, let it grow a little bit. And when it comes back, find a way to help expand it, because we are here to add to the ongoing energy of creation, and we are set up to do that in our unique way. And the more that we can find ways to do that, the more we will fit in the world, and more sense it will make of humans being part of things in a meaningful way. I'm thinking of the Australian Aboriginal term Yoro Yoro, which I think means everything in the world standing up and speaking to you. What do you have to say back? We're here to learn what it is that our soul wants to say. And when we find that connection to our nature, we become connected to the nature of the earth and the nature of the world and the nature of the cosmos. That's our inheritance, and it's meaningful that we try to find it again. So I began with a poem. I want to end with a poem. This is a Ruby poem about being in this world, and I guess I thought of it because of the water in the Earth Diver story. This is how most people live, sleeping on the bank of a freshwater stream, their lips always dry with thirst. In your dream, you're running towards a mirage. As you run, you're proud of being the one who sees this false oasis. You brag about it to your friends. Look, I have the heart vision. Listen, this love of spying far off satisfactions keeps you from tasting the real water of where and who you are now. The real way is who and where you already are. What you search for is sleeping in your very being. And that which sleeps and dreams of sweet water is the taste of the divine in you. The true way is who and where you already are. It's sleeping in your very being. And there's a voice whispering, saying, it's time to awake. It's time to awake. So again, thank you for being interested in the earth, in creation, in recreation, in healing, in imagination, and blessings on your way. Thank you.